things. So let me start on my far left, Todd Dollinger. Todd is CEO and chairman of the Trendlines Group, which supports early-stage companies but also works with large companies as well. They own 2 Israeli incubators, including the Misgav Accelerator or Incubator. And then next to Todd is Art Rosenthal. Art is a longtime medical device executive, including serving as chief scientific officer of Boston Scientific, and has worked with both large and small companies and has gotten involved in his share of big ideas, good and bad. And then the panelist who's going to kick things off for us, we're very fortunate to have Nick Hopkins with us. Nick is just a pioneer in the neurovascular field, particularly minimal invasive neurovascular, also in radiology, professor of both at the State University of New York at Buffalo, and has really been the driving force in putting together what has really been one of the great accomplishments in the neurovascular space, the new vascular center up at SUNY Buffalo, which a lot of people don't realize, and we'll talk about today, includes an innovation component with the Jacobs Institute, which we'll talk about. But Nick, why don't you introduce us and tell us a little bit about the new vascular center up at Buffalo?
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for having me. It's nice to be here. So this is really a joint venture between the health system that I've been working in, Kaleida Health, the University at Buffalo, and the Jacobs Institute. And it started about 7 years ago when I was approached by a family, the family of Larry Jacobs, who was an inventor himself, but died of cancer, and the family wanted to do something to memorialize Larry. And coincidentally, I had been running, and I don't know, Art, if you've been to the Global Vascular Complications Conference, but I had been running for a number of years a small conference where we bring together just some key opinion leaders from the major specialties in vascular: cardiology, radiology, vascular surgery, vascular medicine, and neuro. And we just come together for 3 or 4 days out in the wilderness, and we talk about our worst disasters. The rule is you get up in front of the whole group, you present your worst disaster of the year. And as you can imagine, at this conference, there is some pretty serious carnage. The idea is then to analyze your failure, try to figure out what you did wrong and how you did it wrong and how you might prevent it. And then it's open discussion, so that the cool thing about it is when I present a disaster, I've got cardiologists and radiologists and vascular surgeons looking at and opining on what I've done wrong. So it's been an amazing experience. And then what we did is we pulled together a handful, actually about 18 of these guys. And when the Jacobs decided to want to do this, and we brought in a world-class architect from LA, and we sat around for a couple of days on 2 separate occasions, just brainstorm what would the vascular center of the future look like. So that's what I'm going to tell you about. So why do you need a JI? What is a JI? What will it actually do? That was Larry. He invented beta interferon, which is the drug of choice for multiple sclerosis. And we lost that little company to Boston, because now Biogen is now a big company, as you all know. So what about why a vascular center? Basically, as we all know, the entire body is connected by the vascular system. It's the same arteries and veins in every single organ in the body. It's about the only thing in the body that is consistent throughout. And yet, if we think about vascular disease as the #1 killer and crippler of people in our society, we have cardiologists, neurosurgeons, vascular surgeons, radiologists in the hospital, all working in their own departmental silos. They do not interact very much. We're in different departments, different geographic areas. Then if you go out to the university, you find the same thing. You find silos. You find the engineers and the physicists and the cell biologists and the surface scientists all in their own silos, and they don't talk to each other either. And they sure as hell don't come down and talk to the clinicians. It just doesn't happen very much. So the idea here was to try to bring everybody together, and the idea came out of this complications conference. So #1 goal, break down the silos, bring everybody together, and change the treatment paradigm for vascular disease. Today, vascular disease is so disconnected. If you got a heart problem, you go to a cardiologist. Got a head problem, you maybe come to us. Could we break down these silos and bring everybody together into one unified group. And could that spell the future for vascular care delivery? So the vision, for which I don't think there's a precedent, is a freestanding building, is connected to the hospital for obvious reasons, is physician-led and governed, and that's been a huge effort trying to get hospital administration to give up control to a physician board, minimally invasive treatment and prevention, vascular disciplines and scientists literally forced together by the geography of the building, and the Jacobs Institute is an independent partner to focus on collaboration and innovation. So the Jacobs Institute, it's all about collisions, collaboration, innovation, and we needed a design, which we get out of support from Jacobs, and we needed a partnership manager, because every time somebody said no to me, I just went and tapped Jerry Jacobs, and he came with me to twist their arm and convince him to say yes. So the design basically fits the vision. It's basically the science on the top, and it is the vascular center on the bottom, with the Jacobs Institute as the partnership manager and innovation center sandwiched right in the middle. The building is described by the architect as a sandwich with the Jacobs Institute in the middle. And there's the building, and that ribbon on the outside defines where the Jacobs Institute is located. So science on the top, clinic on the bottom, emergency room out front, the outpatient entrance over on the right side. If you're an outpatient with an elective procedure, which is the way we think things are going, you'll never know you're in a hospital. You go into a beautiful atrium. You'll go to a hotel room. You'll have all your pre-op work done in the hotel, up for your procedure, back to the hotel where your family will be waiting for you, and all the post-op work done there. So the idea here to change the care delivery model and create a nidus for innovation in a high-tech corridor, and to foster collisions, collaboration, innovation, the things that you just heard about, to create an environment where those things can happen more spontaneously and be more supported. The mantra for the Jacobs Institute is, the acronym is CARE, Clinical, Academic, Research, and Entrepreneurship. And I won't go into all the details of clinical, but Jerry's made a big donation to help us recruit some people. On the academic side, we're providing academic infrastructure, medical illustration, photography, editorial staff, so that when somebody wants to publish something, they'll have help. Everyone knows how hard it is to get peer-reviewed publications accepted. Clinical research, not NIH research. That's the university's deal. And entrepreneurship. What's really important is to remember that the Jacobs Institute, sitting right in the middle of this university and hospital building, is completely independent from both. So we don't have intellectual property issues with the university. We're independent. That's been a big struggle as well. So the concept was to take the researchers and physicians and force them together, all the different disciplines, and then take inputs from proven entrepreneurs around the world, corporate partners, world-class experts in the field. I think anybody who studies this field of entrepreneurship and medicine will tell you that the great ideas come, just as you just heard, from looking for answers to unmet clinical needs. It is the guys in the trenches who come up with the best ideas as a rule. It's not some guy sitting off in an office someplace who's a scientist. It's usually a clinician in the trenches who says, this is a real problem, how can I solve it? So we bring all those ideas together into this primordial soup, and then what we're working on in the Jacobs Institute is a proof of concept center, not an incubator, a proof of concept center. So we'll take the idea and vet it. We'll vet it with intellectual property research. We'll do market research. We'll look at the clinical regulatory pathway and see if there's actually a way through the agency. Once we get to that point, we'll have a whole prototyping facility. We should be able to make almost any kind of a prototypical medical device in our prototype center. Then we'll have a training center to actually test it or do training. And then right upstairs, we'll have an animal facility if that's necessary for completing the proof of concept work. If we get to proof of concept, then our idea is to lateral to guys like you just heard from who can actually do something with it. So the idea is take science and try to turn it into business, take risk out and create value, all in the situation where the intellectual property, even the university IP, will be completely under our control. So what do we have so far? Originally, we developed a partnership with Toshiba, which has resulted over the last 12 or 13 years in about $10 million in investment from Toshiba, about 25 in NIH grants, and about another 5 from industry. The new Global Vascular Center is a $300 million building funded by the state, the feds, and philanthropy. And Toshiba is excited enough about this commitment that they've agreed to provide us with two brand new angio suites, a 3T MRI and a 320 CT scanner just for research. Total support's right around $16 million. We've got an initial recruiting gift of 10. We've just got a grant from the state for 4. So the building just opened about 4 weeks ago. So we're just beginning to get rolling. What's really exciting to me about the geography of the building, on the 4th floor, we convinced everybody to build a 1-acre floor plate. Reason? We wanted every cath lab on one floor so that we have 16 cath labs. So all the disciplines, cardiologists and radiologists and vascular surgeons, et cetera, all on one floor. I don't think I've ever seen that before. And right upstairs is the Jacobs Institute, the center to try to bring people together, develop innovation, develop collaboration, and hopefully end up in producing jobs in Western New York. So that's the concept. It's kind of a pre-incubator concept, and we don't know if it's going to work or not because I don't think anybody's ever tried it quite like this before, but that's the deal. So let's go ahead with the rest of the discussion.
Nick, that's great, thanks. And obviously that's one of the themes that you're going to be hearing about throughout the day, and that is the need for collaboration to bring these big ideas first to fruition and then obviously to market.
Yep, absolutely. So I'll take that.
Todd, let me go to you because I don't think a lot of people here know trend lines, and you've taken a couple of device companies public on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, but tell people a little bit about trend lines, and then let's talk a little bit about the device companies that you're involved with.
Very good. I'm just disappointed because I thought you told me I was famous. So, but I'll introduce our operations just a bit, if that works for you.
Sure.
The Trendlines Group is an Israel-based organization. We are, as was said, the owners of 2 business incubators in Israel. One of those incubators is devoted wholly to the life sciences, which for us principally means the medical device industry. Actually, I've been living in Israel now since 1990. Originally from the Midwest, so I've gone from the Midwest to the Mideast. A little bit of a cultural change. But it puts us in an interesting situation because my partner also is originally from the States, and it puts us in a position to there's translational research, I guess, and then there's translational business of trying to bring Israeli culture to the U.S. and to Europe. And it makes for something interesting. We start 8 to 10 new companies every year. Our current portfolio is now over 60 companies that we're invested in, and in most of these companies we have very substantial positions. We are true seed stage investors. We partner with entrepreneurs and inventors and start the businesses. We are not, as the VC model would typically have it, investing when the company's a few years old, or I think as some VCs would like to today, we're not investing after the exit, but well before it. So we are there from day one. We are deeply involved in our companies. Trendlines itself has a staff of over 30 people. That includes a technology support group and a business development group, as well as our finance group. We are involved with the companies from the very beginning and from top to bottom as we seek to develop them. We look for companies to invest in that we can expect something important is going to be achieved within 12 months, and we do that because typically we're raising money at about that age. We make an initial investment in our companies of approximately $1 million, which is intended to be an initial 2-year budget, and the companies are located in our facilities in the north or the south of Israel, and as I say, very, very deeply involved with our staff. We did take 2 companies public on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, and last year we sold one of our companies to Covidian. So we're having a very good run of things. Interesting to note, by the way, for all of the entrepreneurs here, is that most of our capital is actually sourced in the States. The Trendlines Group itself, 80% of our capital at the corporate level is from the States, the other 20% from Israel. And in our portfolio companies, we're about 50-50, about half from Israel and half from the States.
Great. Art, we're going to get into your checkered past later, but why don't we start out talking just about what you're doing now both at Boston University, and you've got a new startup. So talk a little bit about GIQ.
Okay. Well, I'll just talk a little bit about the university side of this. Again, the whole idea is where do you get your ideas from, and how do you incubate ideas in a marketplace that's tough to find funding? Well, universities are, as we know, this is the obvious point, they're rich with ideas, lots of years of NIH funding and other sources of funding, and it's been recognized, and I think Nick's got a very nice model here, that if you can move these ideas towards some commercial endpoint, not at a commercial endpoint, but towards a commercial endpoint, you can start to identify sources of potential startup companies and look for external funding. So what my position at the university now is I'm professor of practice. I work with the faculty. Among other things, I teach a course in product development, but work with the faculty to identify ideas for which they've been working on for years, but might have some commercial opportunity. And then put together a proper development plan that lets them access monies that they can have within grants, but use that productively towards an endpoint of developing the technology in a commercial way. And then working with the Office of Technology Transfer, trying to find partners, external partners who might invest in these technologies to take them farther. Unfortunately, big ideas take big money, and universities can only do so many things. The resources in a university are not what you would have in industry. Nick, I think you recognize the need for hands-on prototyping and development activities that are not usually present in universities, and we try to find some means to do that. We're an engineering department, so we're lucky to have some engineering resources. But the whole concept of mining academic ideas and looking for prospects that can be commercialized is what we've been focusing on at BU and other places. This started in earnest about 6 years ago when we won a Coulter Foundation Award, which many of you might know. Coulter Foundation established a grant program that was awarded to 10 schools. BU was one of the original schools to be awarded. And it was for the purpose of seeding ideas from the biomedical engineering department that might be commercializable. And so this all started 5-6 years ago, and it's moved to the point where we're now trying to identify potential spin-outs. Now, the reason I said all that is because GIQ, a company which I've started, is a technology that's come from BU and is a technology that is a big idea. It's a big idea that was founded by a fellow named Professor Irving Biggio, who spent about half of his career at Los Alamos and the other half at Boston University, professor of physics and photonics. His whole thought was using light to determine the status of tissue. So using light to interrogate tissue and using that information to identify certain aspects of the tissue, particularly cancer and precancer. So GIQ is licensed to technology from BU. NIH has thankfully spent about $10 million and many years. Stand up now.
But just talking into the mic. These microphones are you put them right by your.
Stick this in my mouth. Oh. It's like a lollipop. This technology is an optical technology that is going to be used for colonoscopy screening, and so we're developing a very simple approach. And I think as Howard and Mark said, and I could probably listen to you guys for another couple hours. You really have to understand technology is probably the least thing you have to understand these days in terms of how you're actually going to get a product to the market and what the outcome is going to be. We usually ask 3 questions. I teach the students, what's the market, what's the product, and who's going to pay for it. And unfortunately, today, you almost have to ask the question, who's going to buy the company? And I hate to ask that one because you can't build a good company with the idea you're going to sell it. And you should spend time building a company that has value, and the rest comes naturally, but that's not the way it is anymore. that's my story about one example of harvesting technology from the university. As I said, we were able to take technology that's been invested in for more than 10 years by the government, and to do that in an external way these days would have been impossible. So, I guess the message is the universities are a great place to look for opportunities, and the more and more universities understand that they need to get their technologies used, I think it's going to become a good collaboration.
One of the things we want to do throughout the conference is really kind of drill down to specific examples. So when we're talking about big ideas, Nick, I mean, there are a few bigger than the whole move to minimally invasive neurosurgery, and you were a pioneer in that area. Early on. Got a lot of criticism, a lot of people who said, there's no way you're going to be able to successfully go ahead and do those kind of procedures. Talk a little bit about what that was like and how you go about, and again, Howard and Mark talked about a little bit in terms of when you're getting resistance, you're getting clinical opposition, but yet you remain committed to this idea that you just know is something that will yield better patient outcomes and benefits in the future. Talk about your experience.
Well, all my really close friends in neurosurgery like to say that I got into it because I was no good at open surgery, so I had to figure out another way to do it. But I saw, when I was in training, I did angiography by sticking a needle in people's neck and doing it that way. And I thought there has to be a better way. And then when I got into practice, the radiologists were just beginning to do angiography, putting catheters in patients. And I had a patient who had a vertebral venous fistula. It was a woman whose husband had gotten mad at her at the dinner table and stabbed her with a steak knife. She got a fistula. I needed an angiogram that would show me what was going on, and the radiologist refused. He said it's too dangerous to put a catheter way up there near the brain. So I went down the hall and found a cardiologist who was willing to teach me how to do angiograms, and he taught me the old Sohn's technique of a brachial artery cut down and put a catheter in the arm, and that's how I learned how to do catheter-based angiography. But then it just was pretty clear to me that there had to be a better, less invasive way to do things. And so I think in the beginning I was a curiosity, and then I was a pariah. At least the radiologist, I think, thought I was a pariah. And then over the years, it's just evolved into a new specialty within neurosurgery that I think makes good sense, because a neurosurgeon who's dual trained, which is what we do, we now have about 50 fellows out around the country who are dual trained. I think you can get a better perspective when you have different background. And that's one of the cool things about everything you'll hear about entrepreneurship. I think bringing disparate groups together creates synergies, ideas that you would not see otherwise. One of the real revelations in our lab was one of our guys that we trained, actually a radiologist that we trained, who came to me one day and said, I want to learn more about flow. And this was a long time ago. And I said, well, okay, fine. What do you want to learn about flow for? Well, he said, well, what are we doing here? All we're doing inside of arteries is altering flow. So he went and hooked up with an aerospace engineer. And that resulted in a collaboration that's generated about $20 million in NIH grants and has resulted in a wonderful company. You'll probably all be hearing about Surpass one of these days. It's a flow modulation company for intracranial abnormalities, and it's kind of like a AAA. If you think about it, its main use will be for large inoperable aneurysms, and that came out of our lab. And that's one of the exciting things about what we're trying to do here is to, if you look at companies in general, and Art, you correct me if I'm wrong, but by and large, every time I talk to a company and I tell them I've started an entrepreneurship or an innovation center that is within a university, they want, no thanks, we want no part of university tech transfer. It's an arcane process. It takes forever. There are a million obstacles, and it just isn't worth it. And that was what drove us to insist on independence from the university. And so university tech transfer can be a major barrier, and yet I think there's a trove of wonderful ideas buried in university. I think there's a trove of wonderful ideas buried within the minds of clinicians. Most doctors don't know what this guy knows. They don't know how to take an idea and turn it into something. They think about it. They get busy. They got 20 more patients to see. They're afraid to tell anybody because they're afraid somebody will steal it. They're afraid to talk to a company because they're afraid the company will steal it. And they're a little bit paranoid to start with. So they don't tell people. And those ideas lie fallow. I'd be willing to bet you that there's some wonderful ideas that are out there that could be harvested. And so that's kind of where we're trying to go.
That's a great lead into the whole topic of collaborations. As we all know, unlike in the biotech industry, I mean, there's no new device technology that's been developed by an engineer alone. It always requires engineers working together with physicians, and that whole collaboration process is really something that I'd like to spend some time on. Todd, talk a little bit about how you handle that as far as getting physician input to the ideas that you have, in the incubator, and give us some examples from some of the companies that you're working with.
Physician input. Well, we could do a whole day on that, and the need for it, and the value of it, and also at times the confusion that it can cause. I think for our entrepreneurs, this is often a challenge. Our entrepreneurs are most typically these are MDs or engineers or scientists, segregating again between scientists and medical doctors. We've had some amazing conversations, and I want to tell you the most negative one that I've ever had, which was that this was a company that we were in the process of acquiring, and the fellow who had been running the company for 10 years and which was on the verge of bankruptcy, he explained to me at the closing, he called me aside because he wanted to share his deepest personal thought with me, which was, he said to me, please, it's really, really important. Make sure that whatever you do not listen to doctors or nurses. He truly believed this in his heart, that they would take us in the wrong direction. Well, we certainly have the opposite point of view. During diligence and on, we are very actively involved with talking to key opinion leaders, and as well as individuals who are not identified as KOLs. We're very interested in understanding what's happening, what the opinions are. We do surveys, we do focus groups, and as well, and most importantly, we go out one-to-one to speak to individuals. I think it's the most important source of input we get from the user side. That's critical input.
Art, you've worked on a couple of projects with a physician, Asher Shmulevitz, and I'm thinking specifically about LabCoat and Capella. Talk about that collaboration, how you two came together and came up with, I think, what can be categorized as a couple of big ideas, and specifically tell everybody what LabCoat and Capella are involved with.
Yeah, well, first story of how I met Asher. Asher, it's quite funny. Harvard Business Review was writing a story about his earliest attempt to start an incubator in Seattle, which was one of the first incubators of the type. And I didn't know him, but I was asked to review the article, and I read it, and I did such. And then about 2 months later, so this was in the fall, I can't remember quite the year, but it was probably 1998 or around there. I went to Ted Dietrich's vascular meeting in Phoenix, where most people went in the winter, and we know that. Stan and I met there too, many years, and we would. And I was asked. I was invited to dinner at a physician's house that we know, Jerry Doros. Everybody knows Jerry, and I was asked to pick someone up at the front desk and take him to the house. So I met this guy. I said, hello, Jerry said to meet you, and I didn't recognize him because I never saw him before, and he got in the car, and I said, well, what was your name again? He told me. And I was driving along, and all of a sudden I said, I know who you are. And he said, yeah, I know who you are, because you read this article, you reviewed this article. And so at dinner we talked, and we kept talking, and we became friends, and that's how I met him. Azure had a million ideas and a million companies, and he was responsible for many things that have morphed into other companies, but he was a very productive fellow. He came up with, this is about the same, this time there was all this e-commerce was taking off, and he came up with an idea for a company called eClinique, which was to connect physicians on the web real time. It's one of the first companies. So I invested and lost some money in that. And that's why you have to get good friends, because he felt badly about that. Anyway, as we kept talking and looking, it's not quite the order of the relationship that Howard and Mark had, but we always talked to each other about what the problems of the world were. And it didn't have the means to do much about it, except at one point in time when drug-eluting stents had been developed and recognized and first commercialized, we together talked about what had to be changed and where things could go. And he had an idea, and I was at Boston Scientific at the time. And he came to me and told me the idea, and I said, this is a terrific idea. The idea was to code stents in the cath lab because of the economics and the difficulty of coding stents at the time. And Boston put some money in the company, and I was allowed to go on their board. It was a point in time where Boston had decided that in order to really play the new product game, we had to have some feelers on the outside world, and in order to do that the right way, we had to get more involved, not as intrapreneurs, but entrepreneurs on the outside. So it was one of the first boards that I became on as a Boston person. And typically, the company was formed with a little bit of seed money from Boston, and we continued to develop the technology. As it turns out, coding stents in the cath lab was a bad idea, but the whole concept of the coding was unique, and I won't go into the details. But that changed over a period of time. In 2005, I retired from Boston Scientific because I was obvious that the direction LabCo was moving in might have been a conflict of interest. I retired from Boston Scientific and became the CEO of LabCode. And about that time, we recognized another problem, which was bifurcation stenting. Every cardiologist wanted to treat side branch disease, but they didn't have any means of doing it, and every attempt was failed. So Asher came up with an idea in combination with Antonio Colombo, a physician, on how to address it. And we started that company, Capella, which is still in existence today, unfortunately, 7 years later. So again, that's a little bit of the story of how that happened.
So Nick, let me ask you this. One of the things that we hear frequently from physicians, and you've worked with a lot of companies, is that companies or entrepreneurs will either come to physicians too late with an idea, or they won't take their suggestions into considerations, and that basically a scientific advisory board or really just doesn't serve the purpose for which it is intended. If you're talking to entrepreneurs here, when do you as a physician want to have somebody come to you with an idea, and what kind of input do you see as kind of maximizing the value you can deliver to a budding engineer entrepreneur with a new startup?
So for us at our new center, we want to see ideas as early as we possibly can, because we're not trying to start businesses. We're trying to vet ideas. And so it's a little bit different level. And I don't know if it's going to work or not, because we haven't tried it yet, but we'll find out. But I'd love to just for a second expand on Todd's comment about physicians. I think that there's a lot of literature that really shows convincingly that many of the great ideas come from physicians. There's also a lot of bitter personal experience that once physicians get beyond the idea stage and into trying to actually manage a company, that it is a true disaster, because physicians don't have the business skills as a rule. There are exceptions, as you've seen here. There are exceptions, but most physicians don't. And as I've been involved in several startups. One in particular that we did sell to Boston Scientific that was a wonderful experience. But I realized very early on that when it got to sitting around a board table with some real experts in business and finance, that I was way, way over my head. And the best thing I could do is keep my mouth shut and hope they didn't figure out how dumb I was about what they were talking about. So I could really help them in terms of the technology, in terms of the clinical need. And that's where I think the physicians have their greatest value to a company, is helping you to understand exactly what the best need for this technology is and how it could best be used. And I loved your comment earlier about you develop a device and it all sounds cool, but the cardiologist, that wasn't their business model. They worked in a different way. They weren't going to accept a device when they could prescribe a pill. And we went through that with an oncology project over at Roswell Park Cancer Center, where we had a great way of treating head and neck cancer. But all the head and neck cancer guys at Roswell they all had protocols and big pharma support to treat with IV medications. So a great idea really didn't get very far. So you understanding the clinical needs and using physicians where they're best used and understanding the clinic, but not letting them get too involved in the business unless they have special business skills, I think is the way to go. Does that make sense?
It does, but let me also ask you, without naming names, based on your experience, because again, you've been involved with a number of startups. Do you feel that these companies have maximized, the value that you can bring to these technologies?
I think that most of the ones that I've been fortunate to serve for have done exactly that, but I think that there are a lot of companies that don't do that very well. And I think that having a physician on the team, actually on the board, is extremely helpful if he knows his role. So again, it's just knowing what you're good at and being willing to accept what you're not good at and going forward.
I want to open it up to questions, so if anybody has anything they want to ask the panelists, just feel free to raise your hand. Art, let me go back to your time at Boston Scientific, because there was a time after the company had really gotten established as one of the leaders in drug-eluting stents, where Jim Tobin asked you to kind of go out and start bringing in new ideas, and you brought a new model to the company. And I want to get into this issue of where ideas come from, and to the extent that we can talk about the ability of large companies to innovate themselves as opposed to sourcing ideas from startup companies, which is obviously the traditional model in the device industry. Talk a little bit about the model that you brought to Boston, because that was, like I said, a different model, and then that whole issue of where these ideas come from a large company perspective.
Well, the model is what I described briefly is. Companies say, let's look outside the box, but when you're in a company, the box is in the box. Okay, you can't look inside. You can't deny your existence. That's where you are. And so I don't care who you are. I've always been the fellow who's run the technology development programs, looking 5 years out. You can say whatever you want, but you still come to work every day. If you fail, you come to work every day. You get a paycheck. So the whole concept is you have to get out of the box to do this properly. And the concept was to, from whole cloth, take an idea that is defined from a physician need. Each of these companies that we looked at were physician driven. I'll talk about one which didn't do well. It's a company called Gen 4, which was intended to develop the world's best AAA device, based on the fact that current AAA devices didn't fail, and Boston had invested in at least 3 programs that I had run internally. But the whole idea was to take a fresh start from the outside, and we partnered with a physician who had a unique view on AAA devices, and put a very small team together outside with a little seed money from Boston, took it to a prototype stage. Well, it didn't go past that, but the concept was good because we put a company together who had a very tight budget and had milestones that had to be achieved for success, and whether they were achieved or not was arguable. But there was no safety net, and so in that model, we either met the goal of the development goal or we failed, and that's the essence of that model. Is you can't fake being a startup on inside of a company because you're too well funded and there's too many ancillary resources that you just can't appreciate you have every day, that if you're in a startup you don't have. But I agree with everything here. I mean, there's nothing. The need is the purpose, and you have to have a well-defined need. And given that it takes much longer to develop a product idea than you would imagine, you have to have a need that's durable and sustainable for a long period of time. And I think some of the issues you brought up, you can't try to run after a need that will disappear in 3 days, a week, a month, or a year. It used to be in the early days of medical devices, you can flip a company in 2 years. And so there was a huge number of companies that chased a short-term need, were acquired, assimilated, and the big companies took over after that. But today, I think if you don't have an enduring noble cause, and that noble cause is good, even if it's half as good, then it's tough to get started. And so you really have to spend a lot of time at the needs level with physicians. And I think what you're doing, Nick, is really a good step forward because it recognizes the cross-integration necessary up front to get investment in the idea. And, the other thing we always looked at, there's kind of 3 buckets of opportunity I've always considered. It's in terms of value creation, if you can create a new procedure, that's a home run. If you can improve on a procedure, that's good, or you can improve on a product. And you can take a cut at any of these, and they all have a different point of view, but they all start by identifying a clear need, whether it's a procedural problem or a product problem or just a white space problem.
There's a couple questions over here. Go ahead.
I'll start and just say I think one of the most important things you can do is do your homework before you start. So you need to look at the market very carefully before you decide you're going to pursue an idea and put the next 5 years of your life into it. And that's another area where clinicians can be very, very helpful. If you get the right clinical input in the beginning, you'll know what the cardiologist's business model is or the oncologist's business model is, and you'll know that you either have to learn how to circumvent the barrier by creating something so attractive to them that they want to do it. And physicians are creatures of habit. And you can see why in the complex medical world that we live in today. When you find something that works for you, why should you change? Because there's risk to change. Life is pretty good if everything's very stable. So I'd say the first thing you do is understand that market. And the market is not only the guy that's going to pay for it, it's the guy who's going to use it. And that was a critically important point from my perspective. So what we're trying to do is put together a team within our Jacobs Institute that can look at all of that. And because we have all the clinicians immediately below and all the scientists immediately above us, and we're creating all kinds of, trying to create magnets within the JI to get everybody to come together. I hope that we can that we can more thoroughly vet an idea before we decide to pursue it. So is there a viable market? Is there the freedom to operate, intellectual property-wise? And critically important, is there a pathway through the FDA, or more to the point now, is CE mark something that's going to be fairly easy to obtain? Because many companies that are starting up now are starting up with a business model that is Europe only, and they're going to just wait. They're going to create their market in Europe and then wait for a multinational to come along and say, okay, it's worth the risk to buy it and then put it through the FDA with major financial support behind you. That's the big barrier right now is to startups is they've got to, if they're going to think U.S. market, they got to think FDA, and they got to think probably some kind of a randomized prospective trial that's going to be very expensive.
Todd, do you want to add anything?
Just briefly, to be clear, it's not enough to listen to the market. You have to keep listening to the market. And I think this is a mistake that is not unusual. I think that the fellow who will argue you should not listen to the market, although I can attest to having met at least one of them, he's unusual. But you must keep listening. You must keep checking in. And you must work up a system for understanding how to deal with these inputs. You certainly cannot pivot everything you do from every comment that you hear. And it's very difficult. How do I acquire these data, and then how do I manage this information to make right decisions? On a slightly different angle, I think, sadly, better patient outcomes is an insufficient reason for starting a company. It is not enough. Perhaps it was once, but now it's better patient outcomes, it's faster procedures, and it's cheaper. It has to be faster, better, and cheaper. If it does not meet all three of those criteria, I would suggest that in most cases you pretty much have a loser.
One other thing about that, I love the Lexis phrase, relentless pursuit of perfection. And when you're dealing with medical devices, there's always going to be something better coming down the pike. And when you've got a device, having a staff that can innovate and keep iterating the device, and I'm involved with a startup right now that got FDA approval for a product, and then realized that product was basically, it was going to be obsolete before it hit the market, and then went to a whole research project that got to a new iteration of that device that is a killer. So it's relentless pursuit of making your device better is, I think, really important.
Question in the back. The question is, when you've got a situation where you've got a company based on university-developed IP, how do you address the issue that investors raise with regard to ownership of that intellectual property?
Well, I could tell you personal experience. It depends on the contract you have with the university and how the IP is controlled. There should be. I don't know why there would be a problem. If the university maintains the patents and you have control on the prosecution history, and if there's any assertions of the claims against the third party, that there's equitable distribution of the profits, if there's a settlement, and who pays for who, those usually become the issue that I've been aware of who's going to control this thing. Because if you leave it to the university and you just get the benefit of whatever they do, and you don't cause them to do the right thing, then it could be, your IP could be devalued. So it's all about that. If you control national finance, I don't know where you are in the cycle, but it would be your ability to actually control the IP through some contractual arrangement. And sometimes they can't be as strong as you want them to be, because some universities retain some rights. So that's where it gets cranky. Yeah.
In our shop, we've tried to address that issue by what took a year and a half to negotiate with the university, a deal whereby the Jacobs Institute has exclusive licensing for any intellectual property that's developed within our institute. We're a focused factory. It's pretty much all vascular. So there's lots of other IP that is not covered by our arrangement. But trying to take the licensing, the pain of licensing out from the university, which is most companies fear that black box that the university tech transfer office has. And you can understand why, right? Because one, they're way overworked, they're way underpaid, they got a million things on their plate, and they have these crazy arcane rules like they've got 1 year to decide whether or not they want to even pursue it. And so we've just negotiated a deal that takes all that out and moves it into our space. And then if we screw it up, then we got nobody to blame but ourselves.
I want to try to keep us pretty close on schedule. Are there any other questions? If not, let me kind of raise one final issue. We heard from Howard and Mark this morning about a company, Ardian, that has just pioneered the whole new space of renal denervation. Art, you talked about one of the most important factors in looking at how viable a startup is looking at who the potential acquirers may be. but implicit in a big idea, a new idea, is something that breaks new ground. You're talking about a white space opportunity. How do you balance that out? And Todd, let me start with you. When you're going to take a project on in the incubator, when you're looking at something that is a big new idea that's breaking new ground, what do you need to see in order for you to make the call that this is a viable project for you to take into the incubator?
Well, it starts with who the guy is, who's the potential team.
About people, management, experience.
There's no question. That was I actually thought in our earlier years that since we had a substantial staff and we were very knowledgeable and experienced and old, that we could get over a lot of these things. Didn't have to have great entrepreneurs. That was a very big mistake. An entrepreneur is necessary who is passionate, who is dedicated, who's going to do whatever it takes to succeed. So that's absolutely the first issue. We're looking at the market, and candidly, we're looking at the exit opportunity before we're evaluating the technology. We are just completely market focused, and of course we look at the technology. We don't skip that, but it's the last thing on the list. We perhaps with a lack of humility, we think that we can make most things work. We do not see failure very often because the technology didn't work. We see failure because the team didn't have the drive to make it happen, or potentially at different stages we can't cross the valley of funding death at certain points.
Art, you've said you're not going to do any more CV opportunities, despite having spent a lot of your career in that space. Talk a little bit about, again, kind of what you need to see in terms of new opportunities, new big ideas.
Yeah, I was talking to Steve about GIQ, and I said, I've decided I'll never do anything in the heart or anything that's an implant anymore because I'm too old. That's why I'll never see the market. They take too much time and they're too unpredictable. And I think, and it just takes, and it would be very difficult to raise the money these days to take things that far. What I look for is an execution play. I like to know that the technology works, and that there's a high probability it works, and that the simple things, that it fits with workflow patterns, it can be paid for, it's reimbursable, and that the physician doesn't have to go through a lot of training. So it's after years of working on very academic ideas, not to deal with the very practical concept of if you're going to put this on the market, you have to sell it to someone and someone's going to have to pay for it. So it's really that kind of thing rather than the technology. So I agree. Most technologies, if you have the right people, you can kind of squeak out to some endpoint. The question is whether the endpoint is worth it. And at the end of the day, if it's not going to be paid for and it's going to disrupt workflow, it's not going to be a home run.
Nick, let me give you the last word. And, you've worked in an incredibly challenging space. The cerebrovascular space is one that has really seen its share of disappointments. We've all lived through the decade of the brain and a lot of promising technologies that never worked out. What do you need to see when a company comes to you with what seems to be a promising, exciting new idea in the cerebrovascular space that gives you confidence, say, okay, there's something here we can move forward with?
That's a great question. I don't think I know the answer. I think that it's on a case-by-case basis. You're looking for all the things we've been talking about all afternoon. What is the unmet need, and does this idea have the legs to get to that unmet need? Can you protect it? So it's a process. I think what you were referring to was a fascinating phenomenon that happens all the time. People chase gold, and back in the 90s, we became aware that stroke is a disease that is not a whole lot different from acute MI, right? It may be a different pathophysiology, but the idea of an artery getting blocked by some kind of a clot and shutting down a portion of the brain and causing permanent disability is not much different than that occurs with an acute MI. And so there must have been, Art, how many, a dozen companies that were formed almost overnight to chase the stroke.
At least.
Exactly. And they all failed. And they failed for a lot of reasons, but none the least of which was that there was no public awareness of stroke and the importance and the possibility of achieving a cure. And so there was no market. And even when the first companies were developed, and even when IVTPA was approved, for 15 years after IVTPA was approved, the market use of that drug was less than 3% of the strokes that hit the emergency room. So there was no market for actually going in and fishing out a clot. So that's, I think, what we've been talking about. You need to make sure you got a market to in order to get legs and make something happen.
Great. Well, join me in thanking our panelists. It was really a fascinating discussion. Why don't we take a short 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for our next panel. Thanks.